In this mini lecture, I want to talk about visual aids. Now, a visual aid is something that you should use to support your speech message. It's not something that should detract from your verbal message. You can't just rely on your visual aid as, say, your outline or turning and reading from it. You don't want it to be too wordy. It's just going to help increase the audience's understanding of your speech topic. You're going to rely on your verbal information, your verbal message, and then the visual aid will just supplement what it is that you're saying. So there are some different types of visual aids that we could look at, but in this class we're going to use technology-based visual aids, and this is most easily accomplished by using PowerPoint or Prezi. And you don't need to be overly tech savvy. The visual aid is not something that needs to be overly complicated. As a matter of fact, one of the best things to use in a visual aid are pictures. A picture is worth 1,000 words, and less is actually more. You do not want to fill your screen and fill your slide with lots of words and images, and you'll find in this particular module there are some examples of better visual aids and poor visual aids, and I encourage you to look at those. For our speeches, you will need to have a visual aid for both the informative and the persuasive speech, and the visual aid needs to be technology based. Now, if you need help with that, there is a technology lab, a technology tutoring center, as there is for a writing center. It's in Whitaker 119. You have access as a student to Google Apps, and in there you can use Google Slides. If it's something that you need a lot of help with, you can get in touch with me. Again, this does not need to be anything that's overly fancy. It's just something that's going to support your overall verbal message. So, as I said, remember that the point of any visual aid is to increase audience understanding, and I just cannot explain this and emphasize this enough. If your visual aid is confusing the audience more than it's helping the audience, then you haven't planned a good visual aid. You want to, with the technology-based visual aids, you want to give special consideration to how you create your slides. You do not want to read right from your slides. So let me give you some tips about how to design and lay that out. It's best to use a consistent design for each slide. If you notice in these mini lectures, which I should point out are not necessarily good examples of what you should use as a visual aid in a presentation, because I just have too many words on here, and I do that for instructional purposes, not because I'm giving a speech. But you'll notice that I use a consistent design. I don't have every slide be a different color. I don't have flashing lights. The other thing is we want to use the same font style and size for all the slides. You don't want to try to jam as much information as possible. A little tip for going into the classroom: oftentimes the color that's displayed on the computer screen is not the same as the color that's displayed through the projector in the classroom. Generally speaking, it's best to use just the white background and dark text. The other reason for that: one, you never know what's happening with the projector. Two, you can never be sure if there is any visual impairment of anyone in your audience. So using a light background, preferably white with a dark text, will hopefully eliminate most of those problems. Don't put too much on each one of your slide. Also, you want to describe any pictures that you use. And even if you get a picture just from, Google Images, you could just copy and paste the URL right at the bottom of that picture. It does help to increase your credibility a little bit as a speaker by doing that. Now, there's a Murphy's Law of everything, and there's obviously Murphy's Law of technology. So if it can go wrong, it will go wrong. I will give you a tip. My experience has been something can work on every computer on the planet, and it will not work on the computer in the classroom. And so I will have students who will maybe email themselves their PowerPoint, but I'm also going to recommend, if you have a flash drive, to put on a flash drive. I also have a Dropbox. This is not required, but it's a place where you can put your visual aid into that Dropbox. Again, I was a Girl Scout. I always think it's good to have a backup plan. Flash drives get corrupted, or you leave it lay somewhere, or you forgot your login. You never know what's going to happen. And in the classroom, if it can go wrong, it will go wrong, is probably a good motto. The other thing is that many times students will embed a video into their PowerPoint, and that's fine to do that, and oftentimes it will work, but every now and again the link will not work. So what I'm going to recommend that you do is that you have easy access to the URL for the video that you may be using. This way we can just quickly copy and paste that into a browser. It's something you can test before the speech to see if it's working. So if you have that URL available, it's a lot easier to do that than it is to go and try to track down the video somewhere. You can plan ahead. You should be able to get into the classroom perhaps a little bit early, and we can test that. I'll sign into the computer and we can test these things before your actual speech happens. I will say this, if there is some technology glitch that happens on our end from the classroom, we're not going to be penalized for that in any way. We're just going to kind of roll with the punches, but just some things to keep in mind as you prepare your visual aid. Some presentation tips in using a visual aid. The one thing you do not want to do is turn around and talk to the slides. The visual aid is not your outline. So you want to be able to talk to the audience. For the most part, in the classrooms that we're in, you're able to see the computer screen. There's nothing wrong with glancing at that, but you certainly do not want to talk to the screen. You don't want to talk to the board that's behind you. So don't just read what you have on the visual aid. Also, don't worry about apologizing for any presentation shortcomings. Just move on, and we'll try to roll with the punches as best we can. Check your grammar. A presentation is the worst time to see misspellings, and yes, misspellings is misspelled. So check that. Even if you have somebody else check it, it's not a bad idea. If you're like me, sometimes you read it and you completely didn't pick up on something that was misspelled. Don't make too many slides, or don't try to cram too much information on any one slide. You're never going to get through 20 slides in a 7 or 8 or 9 minute speech. So you want to plan those out accordingly. If you do use an image, indicate the URL, and just right underneath the image is always a nice touch. And just remember, keep it simple. A visual aid is a tool to supplement your speech, not to take over your speech. Now, a couple words about statistics. I know people hear that word, it makes their head spin. You're like, oh my gosh, numbers, how am I going to understand? You get confused. Using statistics in a speech is a great strategy. It can help to build your argument. It can help to give meaning to some of the information that you're sharing. But if you throw a bunch of statistics at us and don't make those meaningful, it makes it difficult to relate to that. So if we want to adapt our information to our audience. So I've had, speakers who maybe used something and they said, oh, well, 15% of people will develop this disease, and then can relate it to the classroom. So say there are 20 people in the class, you could say, of the people sitting here today, 3 of you will develop this disease. Just changing that from 15% to say 3 of you makes it a little bit more meaningful. And you want to, again, choose language that's going to make it simple and easy for the audience to understand. Your charts and graphs are only meaningful if your audience knowledge is increased. And the final slide that I have here, you've probably heard different things looking at kind of the timeline of the Earth, what has happened. So if you've ever seen this, this is in a 24-hour clock, that what would happen. And if we look at this, if I were to say, humans were only on Earth for the last minute of the whole time, you're like, wow, that's impressive. But if you see this chart, you can look at that, and that gives you a pictorial representation of the information you just shared. So just like with the topic and the information in your speech, you want to keep it simple. You want to use that same strategy for your visual aid.